The engine had been dead for 3 days when they found it. A railway flat car abandoned on a siding outside Laufen, Germany. Mid-May 1945. The war in Europe had just ended. A sergeant from the US 20th Armored Division climbed up to inspect what looked like a tarpaulin covering something massive. He pulled back the canvas. Underneath sat the largest, most beautiful automobile he had ever seen, black lacquer. Chrome exhaust pipes running along the bonnet like organ pipes. A windshield so thick it looked like it belonged on a tank. A Dutch mechanic who had been liberated from a forced labour camp 3 days earlier walked over. He took one look at the car and said 4 words that would prove completely wrong for the next 35 years. He said it belonged to Hermann Goering. It did not. It belonged to someone far worse. And within hours, every officer in the division wanted it for himself. This is the story of the Mercedes-Benz 770K, the Grosser Mercedes, the most coveted war trophy of the Second World War, a car so valuable that Allied units raced each other to capture them, so symbolic that officers fought over who would claim them, and so shrouded in lies that even today, we cannot be certain which ones Hitler actually sat in. The 770K was not simply a staff car, it was a statement of absolute power, built to intimidate anyone who saw it. And when the war ended, owning one became proof that you had destroyed the regime that built it. Chapter 1. The impossible problem of protecting a dictator. The engineers at Daimler-Benz faced a contradiction that seemed impossible to solve. Adolf Hitler needed to be seen. His entire political mythology depended on appearing before crowds, standing upright in an open car, arm extended in salute. Assassination was not theoretical. Across his years in power, historians have identified dozens of plots against his life, at least 42 in total. Some involved bombs, some involved rifles. Some involved getting close enough to throw a grenade. How do you protect a man who refuses to hide? The solution required rethinking what an automobile could be. The first generation 770, designated W07, had been produced since 1930. 117 vehicles. Impressive machines with 7.7-litre inline-8 engines producing 150 horsepower without the supercharger, 200 horsepower with it engaged. The displacement of 7,655 cubic centimetres made it one of the largest engines fitted to any production car of the era. But these vehicles were not designed for a head of state who attracted assassins. In 1938, Mercedes-Benz unveiled the W150. This was not an evolution, this was a completely different species of vehicle. Chief designer Max Wagner had spent the previous years building the Silver Arrows, the legendary Grand Prix racing cars that dominated European circuits. He applied the same engineering philosophy to Hitler's new parade car. The oval tube chassis construction came directly from the W125 and W154 races, independent front suspension using coil springs and wishbones. A Dadion rear axle that kept the wheels perpendicular to the road surface regardless of suspension travel. Hydraulic brakes on all 4 wheels, technologies that would not appear on most civilian vehicles for years. The engine grew more powerful still, 230 horsepower from the supercharged configuration, torque figures that dwarfed anything else on the road. A Roots-type compressor engaged at full throttle with a distinctive whine that witnesses described as almost musical, a rising mechanical scream that announced the approach before the car came into view. Then came the protection. In armoured configurations, Mercedes fitted 18mm of manganese-treated steel around the passenger compartment, 40mm of bulletproof laminated glass from the Sigler factory, made by bonding multiple layers of glass with cellulose acetate under extreme pressure. In some builds, mine-resistant floor plating. The doors on armoured variants weighed so much that hydraulic assist mechanisms were required to open them. Hidden compartments in the bodywork could hold machine pistols. In certain configurations, a retractable armoured plate could be raised between the driver and the rear compartment. The weight was substantial. Depending on armour package, these vehicles weighed between 4 and 5 tons, comparable in weight class to a light tank, except this one wore chrome. The car that now sits in the Canadian War Museum weighs approximately 4,100 kilograms. Unarmoured, the 770 could be terrifyingly fast. Armoured, it was a different creature entirely, built to survive, not to race. So heavy that the manufacturer advised keeping speeds moderate to preserve the tyres. The interior matched the engineering. Hand-stitched leather from the finest German tanneries. Polished walnut trim. Crystal decanters mounted in the rear compartment for refreshments during long journeys. In Hitler's personal vehicles, the rear seat was reportedly raised to ensure he remained visible above the crowd even when seated. The price reflected the exclusivity. A standard W07 cost 38,000 Reichsmarks. Some configurations reached 47,500. To understand what this meant, consider that a German industrial worker earned approximately 1,600 Reichsmarks per year. A 770 cost between 20 and 29 years of average wages. Hitler's people's car, the Volkswagen, was pitched at 990 Reichsmarks, a propaganda number but a telling contrast. You could buy more than 40 Volkswagens for the price of one Grosser Mercedes. Only 88 W150 examples were ever built between 1938 and 1943. 46 of those were armoured. The customer list read like a directory of global power. Emperor Hirohito of Japan purchased several for the imperial household. King Farouk of Egypt, Ion Antonescu of Romania, Francisco Franco of Spain, Antonio Salazar of Portugal, who ordered his after surviving an assassination attempt in 1937. Various European monarchs whose names are now largely forgotten. But the most important customer never paid a single Reichsmark. The cars assigned to Hitler were state property, rotated constantly for security purposes. Factory records reference at least 4 specifically designated Führer cars. Nobody outside the inner circle knew which vehicle he would use on any given day. The men who designed this machine understood exactly what they were creating. This was not transportation. This was theatre. This was power made manifest in steel and glass and leather. Chapter 2. The cars that Hitler actually used. The problem with Hitler's Mercedes vehicles is simple. There are too many of them. In the decades since 1945, at least a dozen 770Ks have been sold as Hitler's personal car. Some claims were outright fraud perpetrated on gullible collectors. Others were honest mistakes based on incomplete records and wartime chaos. Separating truth from legend requires returning to the factory documentation that survived Allied bombing and Soviet capture. The most thoroughly verified example is chassis number 189744. Factory records describe it with bureaucratic precision. Commission number 303305. Grosser Mercedes open touring car W150 for the Führer and Reich Chancellor. 4th Führer car. Ordered on September 2nd, 1938 by SS Hauptsturmführer Erich Kempka, Hitler's personal chauffeur since 1936. This specific vehicle appears in photographs from defining moments of Nazi triumphalism. June 18th, 1940, Munich. Hitler and Mussolini riding together during the Italian dictator's state visit. The car is visible in newsreel footage, unmistakable with its massive proportions and the 2 dictators standing side by side. July 6, 1940, Berlin. The victory parade following France's surrender. Hitler standing in the car as hundreds of thousands lined the streets. Flower petals carpeting the route. After the war, this car embarked on a journey that reads like an adventure novel spanning 3 continents and 7 decades, seized by the United States Army in 1945. Used by American military police in Le Havre, France, where occupation troops drove it on patrol, sold to a Belgian buyer who recognized its potential value. Then to a tobacco planter in Tennessee who displayed it as a curiosity, donated to the veterans of foreign wars who used it in parades across America, displayed at the Chicago Historical Antique Automobile Museum with an insurance valuation of $1 million. Sold in 1983 to casino magnate Ralph Engelstad for his Imperial Palace collection in Las Vegas, where it joined an assembly of automobiles owned by dictators and celebrities. In 2009, reports emerged of a sale to a Russian billionaire for several million euros. The buyer's identity was never confirmed. In 2018, the car appeared at auction in Arizona with an expected price of $15 million. The auction house pledged to donate 10% of proceeds to the Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Education. It failed to sell when the highest bid of $7 million did not meet the reserve. Australian mining billionaire Clive Palmer was later reported to have purchased it privately. He denied the claim and threatened legal action against media outlets that repeated it. At every stop, the story got bigger, and the truth got smaller. The Canadian War Museum tells an equally remarkable story of mistaken identity. Their 770K was discovered in mid-May 1945 by the US 20th Armoured Division on that railway flat car near Laufen. The Dutch mechanic's identification as Goering's car was accepted without question. Who would doubt a man who had worked in German motor pools? The vehicle was repainted in United States Army, olive drab with white stars on the doors. It toured America for war bond drives, even as the Pacific War continued. Crowds paid admission to sit where they believed the Reichsmarschall had sat. In 1956, with the war a decade past, it was auctioned at Aberdeen Proving Ground as surplus military equipment. The winning bid was $2,750, a fortune in 1945, a bargain by 1956. In 1970, the owner donated it to Canada. For the next decade, the museum displayed it proudly as Hermann Goering's state car. The attribution seemed solid, the provenance was documented. Visitors assumed they were seeing the vehicle of the Luftwaffe commander. Only in 1980 did researcher Ludwig Koch prove the truth. Working with Mercedes-Benz archives in Stuttgart and the West German Embassy in Ottawa, he traced a fragment of the original license plate, 1A148697. The records matched a delivery to the Reich Chancellery on July 8, 1940. It was Hitler's car, not Goering's, never Goering's. The museum had owned one of the most historically significant automobiles in existence for a decade without knowing it. Chapter 3. The generals who did not take them. Here is where we must correct a popular myth that has persisted for decades. The image of Patton, Eisenhower, and Montgomery racing each other to claim Hitler's Mercedes is compelling. It makes a wonderful story for documentaries and magazine articles. It is also largely false. George S. Patton drove a 1938 Cadillac Model 75 throughout the European campaign, dark green with 3 stars on the license plate. It was the same American-made vehicle in which he suffered his fatal injuries near Mannheim on December 9th, 1945, when a truck collision threw him against the interior partition and broke his neck. Far from encouraging trophy collection among his men, Patton actually tried to curtail it. In his memoir, War as I Knew It, he complained bitterly. Practically every enlisted member of the medical corps had captured a civilian automobile or motorcycle, with the result that we were wasting gasoline at a magnificent rate. He issued orders for the seizure of these vehicles, attempting to return some discipline to units that had been seizing everything that moved. Dwight D. Eisenhower used a Packard Clipper from 1942 onward, supplemented occasionally by a Cadillac for formal occasions. American cars for the American commander. Bernard Montgomery relied on his 1939 Rolls-Royce Wraith, a vehicle he continued to use as commander of the British Army of the Rhine, and later as chief of the Imperial General Staff. A British car for the British commander. Accounts suggest Montgomery actively discouraged the practice of war trophy collection among his officers, viewing it as undignified. The top commanders maintained their national vehicles as a matter of principle and practicality. An American general riding in Hitler's car would have created exactly the wrong symbolism. Victory meant American power, not German luxury. It meant the arsenal of democracy, not captured enemy equipment. The actual trophy hunters were lower-ranking officers and combat units who recognized the 770K's extraordinary symbolic value the moment they saw it. When they discovered these vehicles in garages and railway sidings and forest hideaways, they understood immediately what they represented: proof of total victory, evidence that the enemy had been utterly destroyed. The chance to sit where the most hated man in history had sat. Official United States Army regulations effective May 28, 1945 limited trophy firearms to 1 per soldier and classified vehicles as property of the capturing nation rather than individuals. Reality diverged spectacularly from regulation. The 28th Infantry Division's 5,000 men left the European theatre with 20,000 war trophies, 4 souvenirs per man on average. The regulations existed on paper. The enforcement existed nowhere. If you are finding this history fascinating, consider subscribing to the channel. It takes just a moment and helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Now let us examine what happened when Allied forces finally reached the place where most of these vehicles were stored. Chapter 4. The Race to Berchtesgaden. The competition to capture Berchtesgaden produced some of the most frantic trophy hunting of the entire war. Hitler's mountain retreat in the Bavarian Alps held a concentration of Nazi luxury goods, stolen art, looted wine, and official vehicles unmatched anywhere in the Reich. Every Allied commander in southern Germany wanted the prestige of capturing it. As one American account put it, the lure of capturing this objective was well-nigh irresistible. Considerable fame and renown would come to the unit that was first to reach Hitler's eagle's nest. 3 forces converged simultaneously on May 4th and 5th, 1945. The United States 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division, battle-hardened veterans of North Africa, Sicily, Anzio, and southern France. The French 2nd Armoured Division under General Philippe Leclerc, heroes of the liberation of Paris just 9 months earlier. Elements of the 101st Airborne Division, including the men who would later be immortalized as Easy Company and Band of Brothers. The Americans arrived first, reaching the outskirts at approximately 1600 hours on May 4th. They secured the town methodically, clearing buildings and establishing checkpoints. The French arrived shortly afterward, and immediately a confrontation developed. At approximately 1700 hours, General Leclerc attempted to cross the railroad bridge to enter Berchtesgaden proper. The American cotton balers of the 7th Infantry refused to let him pass. This was their capture. They had arrived first. Major John Rosson described the scene. Leclerc stood upright in his vehicle, assuming the role of commander with authority and great assertiveness. The French general demanded passage. The American soldiers refused. Leclerc was forced to turn back. The rivalry was not merely professional. The French 2nd Armoured had raced the Americans to capture Paris in August 1944. Now they were racing again and losing again. What followed was systematic looting on a scale that shocked even the participants. Drunk paratroopers drove Mercedes luxury cars through the streets at dangerous speeds, firing weapons into the air in celebration. Colonel Heinkes arranged 6 trucks specifically to transport liquor to the divisional headquarters in Salzburg. The wine cellars of the Nazi leadership were emptied with military efficiency. The French, denied entry through the town, found another route to the Eagle's Nest itself. They brought up medics with stretchers to carry cases of wine and champagne down the mountain paths. Accounts describe French tankers dumping military equipment from their vehicles, abandoning ammunition and rations to make room for as many cases of the precious cargo as possible. Easy Company's Lewis Nixon, a man whose drinking was legendary even among hard-drinking paratroopers, reportedly reserved 5 truckloads of alcohol for himself and the other officers. Photographs show American soldiers posing in Hitler's private quarters, sitting in his chairs, leafing through his books, carving initials into furniture as souvenirs. The 770Ks stored at Berchtesgaden were among the most prized captures. Multiple vehicles were seized by different units, often leading to disputes about who had captured what. The French 2nd Armoured Division verifiably took at least one, which is now displayed at the Henri Malatre Automobile Museum in Roche-Taillée-sur-Saône, France. The windows of this vehicle remained scratched and pitted from where French soldiers tested the armour by firing their weapons at the glass. They wanted to see if the protection was real. It was. Before being placed in the museum in 1969, this car toured France, Belgium and Holland for 10 years, raising funds for war, widows and orphans. The transformation was deliberate. A symbol of Nazi power became a tool for healing those the Nazis had harmed. Chapter 5. The Trophy That Backfired. One of the most historically significant surviving 770Ks was never captured at all. It was given away as a diplomatic gift, and the recipient spent the rest of his life trying to pretend he had never accepted it. In December 1941, Hitler presented an armoured 770K to Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim of Finland. The gift was calculated to cement Finnish cooperation on the Eastern Front, where Finnish forces had proven devastatingly effective against Soviet armies during the Winter War of 1939 to 1940. Hitler visited Finland personally on June 4, 1942, Mannerheim's 75th birthday. He arrived unannounced at Imola airstrip aboard his personal Focke-Wulf Condor, intending the surprise to demonstrate German confidence and friendship. The gift car, already delivered months earlier, transported Hitler and Finnish President Risto Ryti from the airstrip to a railway siding, where Mannerheim waited in his private train. The meeting produced a famous recording, the only known example of Hitler speaking in a normal conversational tone rather than his theatrical public oratory. A Finnish sound engineer named Thor Damon secretly recorded 11 minutes of their conversation before SS security officers discovered what he was doing. They demanded the recording be destroyed. Mannerheim intervened and ordered it preserved. But more revealing than the recording was what happened during the meeting itself. Mannerheim deliberately lit a cigar in Hitler's presence. Everyone in attendance knew the Führer's intense aversion to tobacco smoke. He had banned smoking at his headquarters and refused to allow cigarettes in his presence. By lighting up anyway, Mannerheim was testing whether Hitler was negotiating from strength or desperation. Hitler said nothing. His silence confirmed Finnish suspicions about German weakness on the Eastern Front. Within months, Finland would begin secret negotiations with the Soviets. The 770K itself was a fully armoured example weighing several tons, bomb-resistant floorboards, glass thick enough to stop rifle rounds, concealed pistol compartments in the upholstery. Hitler had ridden in it exactly twice, both times on that single day in Finland. Its post-war fate created one of the collector car market's most instructive provenance scandals. Sold to Sweden after the war, as Finland distanced itself from Axis associations. Then to an American collector who recognised its potential. Featured in the 1951 film The Desert Fox as Hitler's parade car, even though it had never served that purpose. The association with Hollywood increased its value and its mythology. In January 1973, it was auctioned as Hitler's parade limousine for $153,000. This set the world record for any automobile ever sold at auction, surpassing the previous record of $90,000 for Greta Garbo's Duesenberg. The claim was false. This was Mannerheim's car, not Hitler's parade car. The parade cars were different vehicles entirely, but the auction house either did not know or did not care. The higher the provenance, the higher the price. Despite the debunking that followed, the car's value only increased. It reportedly resold privately for approximately 30% more later that same year. After decades on display at Dutch Wonderland theme park in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, it was purchased in 1984 by General William Lyon, a decorated United States Air Force veteran and real estate developer. Lyon completed a 15-year restoration and retains it in his private collection to this day. He has reportedly refused offers exceeding $10 million. Chapter 6. Other leaders and their grocer Mercedes. The 770K served as the regime's official transport for its highest figures, though some popular beliefs require correction. Heinrich Himmler used a 770K sedan, one of the enclosed variants, rather than the open touring car configuration preferred by Hitler. The Sinchai Museum's 1938 770K sedan has been attributed to him by some sources, though documentation remains incomplete. Hermann Goering is frequently associated with these vehicles, but documentation suggests he often used Hitler's cars for official functions rather than owning dedicated 770Ks of his own. The Reichsmarshal's personal automotive preferences ran toward flashier sports cars. The Canadian War Museum's long-time designation as Goering's car proved entirely incorrect upon research. One common error must be corrected. Reinhard Heydrich was not assassinated in a 770K. The vehicle used in Operation Anthropoid on May 27, 1942, was a Mercedes-Benz Type 320 Cabriolet B, a much smaller and lighter car. Czech parachutists Josef Gabčík and Jan Kubis attacked at a hairpin turn in Prague's Lieben district. Gabčík's Sten gun jammed. Kubis threw a modified Mills bomb grenade that blew a hole in the right rear door and sent shrapnel into Heydrich's body. The Butcher of Prague died of his wounds on June 4, 1942. The assassination vehicle's current location remains disputed. The National Technical Museum in Prague claims to have the car, but curator Petr Kozasek has noted that no period document has been found that would definitively identify Heydrich's car. Emperor Hirohito of Japan purchased several Mercedes 770s for the imperial household. One example, bearing chrysanthemum imperial emblems on its doors, is now displayed at the Mercedes-Benz Museum in Stuttgart. Francisco Franco of Spain acquired one of the last W150 units in 1942. Spain's non-belligerent status meant the vehicle was never seized as a war trophy. Interestingly, Franco reportedly disliked the car and rarely used it, preferring smaller and less ostentatious vehicles. Ion Antonescu of Romania received a bulletproof 770K as a gift from Hitler, cementing Romania's position in the Axis alliance. Antonio Salazar of Portugal ordered an armoured 770 in 1938 after surviving an assassination attempt the previous year. This vehicle remains at the Museo do Caramolo. Chapter 7. What the Sergeant Found. That sergeant from the US 20th Armoured Division, the one who pulled back the tarpaulin outside Laufen in mid-May 1945, could not have understood what he was looking at. A car that cost more than he would earn in 20 years. Armour that could stop rifle rounds fired from close range. Glass thick enough to defeat a sniper's bullet. The personal vehicle of the man responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of human beings. He saw a trophy, the ultimate souvenir, proof that he and his comrades had won. The Dutch mechanic was wrong about the owner. It was not Goering's car, it was something far more significant. But in another sense, the mistake did not matter. Every 770K represented the same thing. The Reich Chancellery and the Berghof and the Nuremberg rallies and the victory parades through conquered capitals, the machine that carried history through its darkest appointments. 35 years later, researcher Ludwig Koscher would prove the truth through license plate fragments and factory records. The Canadian War Museum would quietly update its displays. The label would change from Goering to Hitler, but by then, something more important had happened. The car had spent decades as a symbol of Allied victory rather than Nazi power. It had been repainted in the colours of the victors. It had carried American soldiers rather than German officials. It had been transformed from an instrument of power into evidence of that power's destruction. That sergeant probably never learned what he had discovered on that railway siding. The war ended. Men went home to farms and factories and families. The car passed through military surplus auctions and eventually to a museum on the other side of the Canadian border. But every time someone walks past it in Ottawa, they see what he saw that day in May. The largest and most beautiful and most terrible automobile ever built, standing silent behind glass, stripped of its swastikas and painted in the colours of the army that destroyed everything it once represented. The numbers tell the final story. Total 770 production across both series. 205 vehicles. Approximate survivors today, 15 to 20. Verified examples with complete provenance. Fewer than 10. Armoured W150 open touring cars known to survive. 5. 3 in private hands. 2 in museums. Price at auction in 1973. $153,000. Expected price at auction in 2018. $15 million. Highest rejected bid. $7 million. The Mercedes-Benz 770K grosser Mercedes. The car that dictators demanded. The trophy that victors wanted. The prize that proved the war was over. 4 to 5 tons of steel and armour and hand-stitched leather. Now, just another exhibit in a museum dedicated to the men who tore it from the hands of the regime that built it. The fog had lifted over Laufen by the time they loaded it onto a transport truck. A sergeant from somewhere in America had found one of the most important automobiles of the 20th century. He probably thought it was just a really nice car. He was wrong about that too. It was never just a car, it was a throne on wheels. And now it belongs to the people who watched that regime collapse in its bunker and burn in the ruins of its capital. That is what victory looks like, not flags and parades. Just a car in a museum, silent and still, while schoolchildren walk past and wonder what all the fuss was about. Some of them will understand when they are older, some of them will not. Either way, the car will still be there. A monument to power that no longer exists, built by men who thought their Reich would last 1,000 years. It lasted 12. The car has already outlived it by 80.